Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I'm your host, Shade Curry. I am so excited to have today's guest on Zoom with me. I am talking to Laurie Israel, and Laurie is the author of the Generous Prenup. So I purchased it on Kindle, so I'm holding up my Kindle copy of the Generous Prenup, and this this book has just been so enlightening for me. Laurie is an attorney, consultant, and mediator. She concentrates her practice on both prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. She works as a consultant and mediator nationwide. And Laurie, you have practiced law for 35 plus years, tax law, divorce law, collaborative law, like estate planning, like you've done all of the things.
Yes.
So like you have a breadth of experience really around anything that could come up in this area, it sounds like. And there was something on your bio that was just so intriguing to me, and it will probably be one of my first questions. You are also one of the initial practitioners and developers of the field of marital mediation. Awesome.
True.
So
Yes.
thank you. Welcome to the podcast. Please say hello to the listeners and just tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everybody. The thing that surprises people about me is I wrote a prenup book, and people think that I'm pro prenup, that I think they're great things. And actually, my message is that they're dangerous. Often they're unfair and they ruin people's relationships. The negotiations are horrible, and sometimes they're necessary, but if you do them, you have to do them with real care, a lot of care, to make them fair, loving. So my book is really kind of an anti-prenup book, and then I tell people some of the pitfalls and some of the ways that if they're going to do a prenup, how to make it a good solid prenup that's marriage supportive rather than detracting from a marriage, because marriage is very hard, and money issues in marriage really are very important to people and do often cause divorce.
Yes. And I really loved your treatment of that. So initially when I started reading it and you were like, prenups are terrible, I was like, my demographic needs prenups. But of course, I read all the way to the part where you said there are certain cases where they might be important, and divorced women with significant assets, with children going into a second marriage were one of your exceptions. And so we'll talk about that. But I really enjoyed the book. I learned a lot. And I think one of the things I learned was, first of all, I want to say I loved your treatment of prenups for LGBTQIA plus couples, because that, yes, my guess is that's not really handled or given fair consideration in many books about, marriage or remarriage or, divorce. So for anyone listening, I do have some listeners who are in same-sex relationships. I do definitely want to recommend Laurie's book. Covers and really does an amazing treatment of your situations. So one of the things I wanted to really start with was your concept of marital mediation, just because prior to divorce, I was wondering, like, what are your thoughts about what is that, first of all, and how could that help prevent divorce?
Yeah, a lot of the problems in marriage relate to money and finances. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And when something goes wrong with that, sometimes meeting with a mediator who is good at financial issues, and I think lawyers tend to be, especially divorce lawyers, because divorce lawyers know what wrecks marriages because they're divorce lawyers. And also, divorce lawyers are generalists in terms of understanding estates, trusts, assets, businesses. And so when a couple can meet with a mediator that's having a financial issue, usually in a mature, longish marriage, that can be really helpful to the couple to try to figure out how they might resolve it, what kinds of thoughts are creating the disturbance in the marriage, and talking it out. It's kind of not really a issue that psychotherapists or counselors can do that well, because it really has to do with the nitty-gritty of finances, almost divorce law. But it's really important in that if you're going to have a postnuptial agreement, that there's an intent to try to stay married. Otherwise, there's some abuses that can happen. For instance, there's some cases where somebody convinced somebody to get into a postnuptial agreement, they transferred property, and then 3 months later they said, I want a divorce. And they advantaged themselves in the negotiation. Because when people are married, there's something legally called a fiduciary duty that has arisen. Fiduciary, like trusts, are fiduciaries to the beneficiaries. Married couples are fiduciaries to each other. They are supposed to be working in each other's best financial interests. They're supposed to be honest. They're supposed to have financial honesty. You've probably run across in your practice couples where that wasn't the case.
Oh, 100%, for sure. And you actually treated that really well in the book as well. You had, I think, a chapter or a section of it on, the American view of marriage and property, and the fact that we have laws. They're not perfect. But here in America, we do have laws that protect that trust, that protect that contribution to a marriage, or the concept of contributing to a marriage. And you talked about how a prenup could actually override that and harm a spouse.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've probably heard that contracts have to have consideration. In other words, if you pay me something, I have to give you something. That's consideration. And oddly enough, in most states, prenups don't have to have any consideration. So somebody is taking something away from somebody without giving them anything. And this is before the marriage, when people might be engaged. And lots of states say that before you get married, you don't have a fiduciary duty. And yet some people have been engaged for years and have a very close relationship. And yet a prenup lets them, prenup law in most states let them do some very harsh dealing in the prenup, and that's harmful to a marriage, because the negotiations are harmful. You feel like the person doesn't care about you anymore because he or she wants to take away things that could be rightfully yours, and put you in a bad situation when you think about how you'll be 20 or 30 years down the road.
Yeah. And this is really important for women, because as of 2023, we have things are not, so to speak, in the culture fair. There's still a gender wage gap. All of that is still currently happening. And, knowing my audience, what my clients have been through, what I went through, women tend to be, not always, tend to be the ones in the relationship who are earning less, or who are leaving their jobs or giving up their careers to stay home, to raise the children, homeschool, all of those things. And I remember that in your book, you had an example of how, someone who gave up her career, but then had a prenup where he kept a certain part. He ran a business, and he kept a certain, he was able to keep part of the increase in his business or the profits over time out of marital property. But then you have the spouse who is raising children and not able to do the same.
Yeah. And, and when you know about that and you're married and you see that happening, how it's going to hurt your marriage. And it also, the person that is doing that, the person that's in the business, they must know, they must feel guilty and feel bad about it. And so that's when a marital mediator, a postnuptial agreement mediator, can come in and help a couple think about it and try to come up with a more fair result. And even if they had a prenup, they can amend the prenup. I call it a fixing a prenup postnup.
Love it.
Sometimes I get calls and I'm asked to do that. I'm asked to help people fix their prenup because it was rushed. It was very kind of nasty, and they don't want that anymore. Even the more moneyed spouse doesn't want that anymore. And so you kind of work it out again. So that can happen.
Yeah. And I think I would love to, this was going to be one of my last questions, but I think this is a good time to bring this up. Just having that conversation. If you're in a relationship where, and you talked about wealthy families where it's the parents of the person getting married who want a prenup, or who say, well, we want to protect our family assets from the spouse, etc., or someone who is already in that relationship where there's a prenup and they're starting to feel like it's unfair. how do you bring up that conversation? How do you start that conversation? If you're the person who's like, this is hard, I hate this.
Well, if people are getting married, if they're working on the prenup, there's always that, it's usually that uncomfortable time, but what a prenup, that's why mediation is such a great way to start the process, because you have a neutral mediator who's going to have some talks with the people. And sometimes people, when they just talk together, that talk can get really hot and they don't have the tools to be able to think about it. Whereas if you have a trained mediator who is probably a divorce lawyer, because divorce lawyers seem to be more sensitive about marriage and don't view a prenup just as asset protection, because a lot of business attorneys and estate planners, that's just the way they view it. This is asset protection. But what I do when I refer people to attorneys after I do the mediation to write it up, I go to the collaborative law divorce bar, the collaborative lawyers who are really good lawyers that know divorce, that know what happens to marriage, and they're good at finishing up the process.
Right.
So it's talking about having the people in a room with a mediator talking directly, rather than starting by having two lawyers hash it out and maybe not really reflect what their clients want.
Right.
It just seems that it's functionally a better way to do it in practically all cases.
Yeah, you're coming from the perspective that both parties want the best for each other, especially if they're getting married for the first time and they love each other.
Yes.
Now, we assume that, at the beginning, then people who are, divorced, like my clients, and they're going into this second relationship and they do love each other. They've just met this person.
Yes. That's sometimes a good reason to have a prenup. And I'll tell you why. If people have some money, if people have some money, then they probably want to be able to give money to their children when they die, the children of the first marriage. Some of them have been through a really bad divorce and they don't want that to happen again. They don't want to have to go to court again and have a horrible divorce. And prenuptial agreements can have alternative dispute resolutions. And I have a very robust one in my agreements and in my term sheets for mediation that says mediation first, then collaborative law. Then if that doesn't work, binding arbitration. And if that doesn't work, non-binding arbitration. You can't arbitrate the rights of the children of the marriage, but you can arbitrate in a non-binding way that if you agree on it, it will be approved by the court. If the court feels it's fair to the children, because courts have a state policy to protect children.
What's the difference between mediation and arbitration?
Mediation is it's a very good question. And I haven't been asked that before, but mediation is where you meet with somebody and you talk things out and the mediator can help you come to a resolution. The mediator is not going to decide for you. You and your spouse or your future spouse will decide for yourself. And the mediator will probably write something up either as a term sheet or a memorandum of understanding, which is your understanding, which could be made into a binding enforceable contract. Mediators sometimes write contracts if they're in the same state as the people they're meeting for. If these are in a different state, then they'll refer them to attorneys if they want to write it up. And arbitration is almost a substitute for going to court. The parties hire an arbitrator who can be most often is a lawyer, sometimes a retired judge, and they pay that person to get all the evidence. And usually the rules of evidence don't apply as much as they do in courts, so that it's a streamlined process. And the arbitrator comes out with a decision on what happens if it's a divorce, say a decision about property division. It could be a decision about alimony, and that decision can be binding, so that people have to live with that.
So it's sort of like you went to trial, but you didn't have to do the whole big dramatic trial thing.
It's much faster and much less expensive than going to court.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's really good. And a prenup agreement could just have that, just that provision. But But prenups, they're kind of a double-edged sword because sometimes they really hurt and sometimes they really help. They really relieve people so that they can
Mhm.
have a better marriage, like the second
Yeah,
marriage
like the
situation.
second marriage. Yeah.
Or
Um,
situations where parents are really rich parents are trying to get you to have a prenup, and you're kind of in between your love for your parents and your love for your spouse. And, you can't really say no to your parents, but you want to be generous
mm,
to your spouse. Because people,
yes.
when they're getting married, they do want to be generous to each other.
Yes, yes. And actually, I think we should dig into your concept of a generous prenup. You talked about the generous prenup, you talked about contribution and what
Mhm.
that means and how important that is to the health of the marriage. So
Yes.
what are your thoughts? Like if you were to say, if someone said, hey, what's a generous prenup? I want a prenup in my second marriage, but I want
Mhm.
it to be generous. I want to make sure I'm taking care of my spouse and I'm being fair and I am making sure that our marriage will be healthy, even though I'm passing on some of these other
Mhm.
assets to my children.
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to say sometimes some of the assets can be passed directly, and some of them can be used in a Q-tip trust for the spouse that is surviving. And then what's left gets passed to your children. And that trust can be an income-only trust, or it can, it can have some triggers so that it's likely that the money is not all used up unless it needs to be.
Mm.
But in a second marriage, it's really important to look at the financial health of each of the parties, because sometimes people are equally financially healthy. I shouldn't use the word healthy, but secure.
Mhm.
And sometimes people aren't. And so even though you have children from your first marriage and you're getting married again, you do need to be caring and assess carefully that the other person's needs, and look towards old age too. Look
Yes.
at the future.
Yeah. And then
So
situations where, if you pass away first or if they pass away first, really taking care of that whole. And I think one of the things I thought about was if the spouses aren't able to be generous or able to really look at the whole contribution, they possibly should reconsider whether or not this is the person. Because that's my job. My job is to help divorced
yeah,
women get to the point where they're certain that this is the
yes.
person for them.
What else is marriage but being considerate to each other?
Yeah,
Is
yes,
it really that's the key to it, to really caring about another person and
yeah,
putting their interests in the forefront, and also
right.
supporting each other. Because in a marriage, when you can support each other, and I don't mean money, but support, which means somebody can stay at home and take care of a house and be the householder and have, do that as their contribution. And,
Mhm.
and that can free up the other person to make money and to be out in the world and do that part of it. And that's where contribution comes in, because people have different types of contributions in marriage. And
Okay.
when you start removing your contributions, then you start making the marriage limp,
Mhm.
weak.
Right. What
That's
are
when
the,
marriages fail.
I think about contribution, I know, someone who raises the kids or, brings finances. What other types of contribution are there in relationships?
Companionship, reading in the same room together and sharing what you're doing, watching
Yeah,
TV together, doing things,
yeah.
having some interests shared. They don't have to be all shared. Somebody
Mhm.
to talk to,
Yeah,
when you get home, or if you're home all day and your spouse is all day, somebody to talk to, somebody
yeah.
who you know will take care of you when you get old and sick, and
Mhm.
you'll do the same for them.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I was
stay
thinking,
together, that's special.
I was talking to my clients this morning, and some of them are always like, I'm going to put off this dating thing. And I'm like, I'm so glad I didn't put off dating and getting married a second time, because
Yeah.
just in this last month, we've just had some challenges with our teenagers. And I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not single right now. I mean, I could handle it if I were.
Yeah.
But my God,
Yeah.
so much better
Oh, yeah.
to have
People bring
someone
different
to,
strengths to marriages, and
yes.
sometimes the same ones, but sometimes people have different strengths. Um,
Yeah.
and that's really good. And
Yeah.
appreciating another person, appreciate the other person's personality, and maybe
Yes.
trying not to emphasize their defaults that you can see pretty well too.
Hey, yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And I think
Yeah.
and sometimes it does depend on what the faults are. I
Yeah.
think a lot of us who were in long-term marriages who got divorced was because just at least in my case and in many of my clients' cases, you were with someone who was bent on not making their contribution.
Yeah.
My ex-husband, 6 months before we separated, which the separation and the divorce were a surprise to me, had opened a new LLC. So we had an LLC together, and we started a business together. And at the point of the divorce, I had sort of pivoted to homeschool the kids, and he was mostly running the business. But he had started a new LLC, and all of the finances from clients were funneling through this new LLC with new bank accounts. And I had no idea for almost 9 months. And so, no, of course, in that case, when the way I think about it, and I'd love to know your thoughts, I don't even know that a prenup could have helped in that situation where you have someone who's just not wanting to make their contribution.
Yeah. Well, as a divorce lawyer, when somebody does that, that's a financial infidelity, and all that money could be drawn back in divorce law. It's kind of, it's fraud, basically. And I've run into that very little in my law practice, luckily, and maybe because people who chose me, didn't do that. But that sort of thing is what divorce law cures, because you're not supposed to do that. There's a term in law called fraudulent conveyance. Like if somebody's suing you, or somebody's going to sue you, and you transfer all your assets to somebody else, they can be pulled back. That's so the law does cure problems like that, and I hope that they did for you when you got divorced.
It's I think with divorce, I think there was a way my attorney put it. She's like, no one's ever happy. No one ever feels like everything played out fairly after a divorce. So it probably did, but I don't know that I necessarily see it or feel that way, which is fine. It's not a problem. It was sometimes the joy of being in a healthy relationship far outweighs whatever monies I wanted to recover or thought I could or should recover.
Right.
So I have a few clients currently, and one of them is eagerly waiting for the podcast to come out. So she's 63 years old. She has her own business, makes, multiple six figures. And she is now in an exclusive relationship for over 6 months now. She and her boyfriend are planning to move in together and purchase assets together, a home together later this year. And, he's a great guy. They have had all of these conversations. They both feel like, we both have children. Our children are in different places in life. Some are more settled, some are a little less settled. And, they've agreed to create a prenup to, facilitate sort of just those wishes. If you were to give them, okay, this is where to start. This is the first call to make. This is the first step to take. What would that be?
I would say find a mediator who is experienced in mediating prenuptial agreements.
Okay.
And put yourself in the care of that mediator. That mediator is going to get from you all your financial information and sift it, through the sifting of an experienced person who can understand them, and then we'll start having mediated, facilitated conversations with you about what you have, what you might want to share, what you might want not to share, how you're going to be supporting yourself now and in the future as you age, because you might be using some of your retirement assets, and how are you going to decide who's and how much and what's your living expenses going to be, how are you going to support it? And so that's a really good first step, because that process can get you to creating, the two of you together with the help of the mediator will create a term sheet of all the terms that you want to have in the mediated agreement. And then what I do is I because sometimes attorneys can really sandbag the whole thing. They can be very aggressive about wanting to protect your assets and not have you give any control over anything, and sometimes not listen to what you want. So the next step what I do is I create a list of attorneys that I find, if it's in a different state, through the internet, because I have screens that I use, and basically I look at collaborative divorce attorneys mainly, and I look at their websites, and I can kind of ascertain usually what they're going to be like and what their attitudes are going to be like. And then we
Yeah.
have a wonderful session, which I call a beauty show, where I give them their names, I put them on, we look at all their websites, and then
Mhm.
they see who they want to choose. And
Yeah.
usually each of them might approach two, but they have to be
Okay.
different attorneys. And then the attorneys already have a term sheet, so the
Mm.
terms are pretty much done. They will provide individualized advice for their clients. One of them will write it up, or they both will, one of them will write it up. And what I do is I try to have them write it up in accordance to the term sheet as might be amended or adjusted. But
Mhm.
don't give it to us until it's all written up and you think it's all ready. Otherwise, there's drafts and drafts. I don't know whether you experience
Mhm.
this in your divorce, but draft after draft of agreement with changes, and everybody
Yeah.
gets tired of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's one
100%.
agreement then based on the term sheet. It's really streamlined process that pretty much has everything in it near the final.
Love it.
So that
That's so
seems to
good.
be the best way to, in general, to do it. And the way
Yeah.
that creates the most peace with the couple, because prenups can be very emotional.
Yes. Yeah. What kinds of triggers have you seen that come up along the way? Just emotional triggers or
Well,
emotional
triggers
responses?
responses to taking away assets, basically, responses
Mhm.
feeling unloved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in a
It's
lot of ways,
almost right.
love is money, they say, right?
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
money is love. I don't know.
When it, one of the ways we do show love is, how we give,
Yes, right. How we
how we
care.
give to our children and how we give to the people we love and our family members.
Yes.
And I
And our
almost like,
spouses
and
too.
our spouses. Um, and I think as I listen to you, and I'm because and I guess it's those of us who are uninitiated and who are not attorneys and who don't, we read the internet, and the internet has so much to say about things that it doesn't know anything about.
Right.
The word asset protection really has been a lot of what has come up just in general. But as I listen to you, it's almost like that's not the right term for the approach for
Yeah.
a generous prenup. Maybe it's more like asset contribution or
Yeah.
asset,
Understanding. Yeah. It's a
asset
financial plan
understanding.
for your marriage. That I think
Yes.
that's what I call it, because
Yeah,
that's really what it is. It's a financial plan for your marriage.
right. And the marriage
Yes.
itself is an asset. A good marriage,
Yes.
is such an asset. We are
Yes.
wired for connection, different forms of connection. So it's not the only form.
Yes.
But, I think bringing it to the table in these conversations as the asset really, and the
Yes.
other assets are, you know, maybe secondary, and I'm speaking as a layperson, but
Yeah.
almost like, if you truly love someone, those are secondary. Not that you wouldn't take care of those issues, but you wouldn't make them the main issue.
The way I articulate it is, what's more important to a person, money or the marriage?
Yes,
And
yes.
a lot of a lot of people are encouraged by the media and what they read to make money more important, and
Yeah.
protecting your money more important to your marriage. That's the problem, because
Mhm.
the marriage is really, if you're getting married, the marriage is more important than anything. So don't do
Yeah.
something that would detract from that.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for sharing. It really is, I guess your view and your book are really a voice of reason to whenever a celebrity gets divorced, there's always a lot of interest in how are they
Yes,
dividing
right.
the assets and how much did she get and
I,
all of those numbers.
I'd like to say two more things. One is that there's a lot of pushback on my views by younger people, like millennials, and they say, why shouldn't we have a plan for our marriage? Why should we take a risk? But the problem is that these people have not experienced what a long-term marriage is. And they
Mm.
also don't understand what the laws about marriage and divorce and estates are. And that
Mhm.
laws are designed to be good, not that you have to submit yourself to them, and you can have a prenup, but it's not that they should be thrown away. They're very persuasive. And so if you have a prenup, you can actually be more generous than the law is in some ways, and less generous, but you know what you're doing. But the young people that object to not having a prenup, I think they don't know what a long-term marriage is. And I'm afraid that they are taking actions that are going to hurt themselves.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a call to say, hey, everyone, whether you're considering your first marriage or your second or third marriage, or, whatever, if you are like this, I think this is just, your book is just a great education for all adults.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. It opened my eyes. It really has put some conversations on the table for my husband and I about and even we're very happy with the way we have things set up in our relationship. But I'm like, we could do some things better. We could be more open. I was like, so I really appreciate the book. Listeners, I really just want to encourage all of you to just read. This is just, it should just be required reading in general. If you're going to be in any relationship of any kind of romantic relationship, because the concepts and the ideas are really, you outline them in a way as to promote the health of all the relationships, whichever one is. And because you have the expertise in law, you told us what we didn't know, all the stuff that we were making assumptions about from the outside of the law. You really laid it out in simple language that was very, very helpful. And I've already given your name to a couple of my clients who are in that position and said, hey, you should really check out this book and check out the podcast when it comes out. So,
and one more thing, an article was written that appeared yesterday online. It's in The Cut, which is the New York Magazine online part. And the author was named Charlotte Cowles, Cowles. So if you search her name and my name, it's called Why We May Not Have to Have a Prenup. And she interviewed me. It's a whole long interview of my views. So you'll be able to read them if you access that article.
Yeah, we will link that up. I'll get the link from you and we'll link that up in the show notes, as well as your website and any other links that you would like.
The book can be gotten in Kindle or print version from Amazon.
Right. Okay. So any last words? The majority of my listeners are divorced women who are dating again, who are considering a new relationship. I think finances is one of the fears that keeps them from dating again. What words of wisdom, advice, encouragement would you have for the listeners?
I think that, one of the things that you said, made me think about, women and men tend to have different values in certain respects. And men seem in general more attuned to the work world and succeeding in it and making money. And, that's important for them. Men do sports, and it might be something like sports. And women are very into personal relationships, children, home. And that creates a difference. That creates a difference in very often in financial picture between men and women. But it goes back to contribution, where both parties contribute to the marriage in different ways. And so a lot of women who have less money or make less money or have less assets feel guilty about it, but they shouldn't, because the women are contributing something else.
Yes.
Everybody's contributing, and those contributions are equal, or else you wouldn't want to get married. The two people wouldn't get married.
100%. 100%.
So what I guess my advice is not to sell yourself short, because you don't have as much assets as the person you're dating.
Yeah.
You don't have as much income.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
So important.
Thank you so much for being here today, for sharing so generously of your knowledge. Listeners, definitely go to the show notes, read the New York Times article, check out Laurie's book. I love the book. I read it. When we scheduled, I was like, I definitely want to read this. So I gave myself enough time to read the book. I highly recommend it, because I think often we're getting advice from friends and family who don't know what's up with marriage and money. And Laurie's book really is quite an education. So Laurie, thank you again for being here today. Appreciate your time. Listeners, we appreciate your time and attention, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, great.